The moment the envelope landed on the table in front of my brother, I watched his face go through 5 different emotions in about 3 seconds. Surprise, confusion, the beginning of a smirk, then understanding, then something I can only describe as the color draining out of a person in real time. He'd spent 26 years treating me like furniture, useful when needed, invisible otherwise. And now here we were, in the Rideau Club of all places, with half of Ottawa's legal and financial community eating their salmon 2 tables over. And my brother Fletcher Arnault, 44 years old, senior partner at Arnault and Associates, our father's pride and joy, holding a document he clearly had not expected to exist. I didn't say anything. I just picked up my water glass and waited. I should back up. My name is Madeleine Arnault. I'm 37. I'm a forensic financial analyst for the federal government. Specifically, I work with the Public Sector Integrity Commissioner's Office, which is a way of saying that finding buried money is what I do for a living. I find things people hide, accounts, transfers, paper trails that loop back on themselves 3 times before they go where they were always going. I've been doing it for 11 years. My family did not know this. That's not an accident. Our father, Roland Arnault, built Arnault and Associates from a 2-person operation in a Gatineau strip mall into one of the most respected estate and corporate law firms in the National Capital Region. He did it through genuinely hard work, a ferocious mind, and an absolute unwavering belief that the firm would pass to Fletcher. Only Fletcher. This was decided somewhere around the time I was 8 years old and Fletcher was 15, and as far as I could tell, no event in the intervening decades had caused my father to revisit that conclusion. I was expected to marry well and produce grandchildren. I did neither. What I did instead was get a degree in accounting, then a second one in data analytics, then quietly worked my way into a government position where I spent my days untangling the financial crimes of people who believed they were untouchable. My mother, Céleste Arnault, was a gentle woman who loved all 3 of her children, me, Fletcher, and my younger sister Pippa, with genuine warmth, but who had also spent 40 years operating within the architecture my father had built, and she had absorbed its rules the way you absorb the smell of a place you've lived in too long. She didn't question them. She navigated them. Pippa, Philippa, 32, a landscape architect in Vancouver, had figured out the same thing I had. The best way to exist in our family was to be far enough away that the rules didn't reach you. She called me every Sunday. She flew home at Christmas and kept her head down and got back on a plane. Fletcher had stayed. Fletcher had thrived. And for 26 years, Fletcher had taken every opportunity to remind me of the difference. It started small, the way these things always do. A comment at Christmas dinner about how I was still in the public sector. A raised eyebrow when I mentioned a conference I'd attended in Geneva. The time I brought a date to our parents' anniversary party, and Fletcher spent 20 minutes quizzing him about where he'd gone to school, and the date, who was a perfectly decent man who'd gone to Carleton rather than Queen's, had excused himself early and never called me again. Fletcher's wife, a woman named Cecily, set 41, had a talent for the condescending version of the same cruelty. "It's so wonderful that you're happy with a simpler life, Maddie," she said to me once at Thanksgiving, with her hand on my arm. "Not everyone needs the big career. Some people just want to be comfortable." I had smiled. I had refilled my wine glass. I had said nothing. This was strategy, not weakness. I want to be clear about that because even 6 years ago, at that Thanksgiving table, I already knew things were wrong. I'd started to notice the numbers didn't add up. Our father had a family trust. The Arnault Family Trust, established in 1991, the year before I was born. It held real estate, a commercial property on Spark Street that had been generating rental income for 30 years, a cottage property on Lac des Chênes that my mother's parents had originally owned before it was transferred, and a minority stake in a small manufacturing company outside of Canada that had grown considerably in value since the 1990s. The trust was supposed to benefit all three children equally upon our father's death or incapacitation. That was what the original deed said. I had seen it. My mother had kept a copy in the filing cabinet in her home office. And when I was 24 and she was in the hospital for a knee replacement, she had asked me to retrieve her insurance documents, and I had also photographed everything else in that filing cabinet with the methodical instinct of someone who had already decided what they were going to do with their life. Three equal beneficiaries. Clear as anything. What I found when I started looking properly 2 years ago was that the trust documents had been amended twice. The first amendment 7 years ago had reduced my share and Pippa's share and increased Fletcher's to 60%. The second amendment 3 years ago had reduced ours further. If the amended documents were valid, Fletcher would receive 78% of the trust's total assets. Pippa and I would split the remaining 22. The amendments had been witnessed and notarized. They had been filed with the correct registry. On the surface, they were clean. What they weren't, if you looked at the right databases and knew what you were looking for, was legitimate. My father's signature on the Second Amendment had been executed during a period when Roland Arnault was recovering from a significant cardiac event. I had his medical records, obtained through my mother, who trusted me with her health card and her passwords because she trusted me with everything, always had, even when she'd given up trying to fight my father on the subject of the trust. He had been on a medication during that recovery period that his cardiologist had explicitly flagged as potentially impairing executive decision-making. There was a notation in his file. More importantly, I had the original documents, and I had a forensic document examiner's report. Private, commissioned by me personally, paid for out of my own pocket, that identified inconsistencies in the paper and ink composition of the First Amendment that were inconsistent with a 2018 filing date. That amendment hadn't been made in 2018. Someone had backdated it. I didn't have to look far to figure out who. Fletcher had a paralegal at the firm. Her name was Kathleen Voss, 29, and she had worked for Arnault and Associates for 4 years. What I found, after 3 months of careful looking, was that Kathleen Voss had also, during this same 4-year period, received 6 deposits into a personal account that totaled just under $24,000. The amounts were irregular. The timing corresponded, loosely but trackably, to the weeks surrounding certain filings. I want to be careful here because I know what I'm saying. I'm not someone who makes accusations lightly. I built my entire career on the understanding that financial data tells a story, but the story has to be complete before you tell it. I took 8 months. I cross-referenced everything I had against public registry data, corporate filings, and court records. I talked to a former colleague who specialized in document fraud. I had 2 separate conversations with a private lawyer in Montreal, not Ottawa, specifically not Ottawa, about what the legal landscape looked like, and then I waited for the right moment. The gala was my mother's idea, indirectly. It was the Royal Ottawa Mental Health Centre Foundation annual fundraiser, a genuinely important event, held every November at the Shaw Centre, black tie, 800 people, major donors and government officials, and half the medical establishment in the city. My mother had sat on the foundation board for 12 years. She was being recognized this year with their Lifetime Giving Award. It was the kind of night where the whole family was expected to appear together. It was the kind of night where the optics of family unity mattered. Fletcher called me 3 weeks beforehand. He didn't call often. When he did, it was usually to convey information he could have texted in a tone that suggested he was doing me a favor. "Mum wants you there," he said. "Dress appropriately, this isn't a casual thing. I know what the Shaw Center Gala is, Fletcher. Just saying. It's a significant evening for her. Try not to make it about you." I had been about to make absolutely nothing about me. But after that call, I went back to my files and I confirmed, one final time, that everything was in order. It was. The night of the gala, I wore a dark green velvet dress and my grandmother's pearl earrings, and I arrived alone, and I checked in at the registration table, and the woman behind the table, a volunteer, middle-aged, warm smile, scanned my ticket and looked at her screen and said, "Oh, Miss Arnaud, we have a note here. You're actually at table 4 this evening, with the board members. Your mother requested it." I hadn't known that. I felt something loosen slightly in my chest. I found my mother first, near the bar, in her dark navy gown, looking tired in the way she'd been looking tired for 2 years. Celeste Arnaud, 68, retired secondary school vice principal. The person who had read to me every night until I was 9, and who still sent me clippings from the Ottawa Citizen when she found articles she thought I'd like. She squeezed my hand when she saw me and held on for a moment longer than usual. "You look beautiful," she said. "So do you," I said. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous." She smiled. "Don't let Fletcher monopolize the table. He does that. He's been doing it since he was 6. She touched my face once and someone called her name from across the room and she was gone. I found our table. Fletcher was already there, with Cecily on his left, and 2 of his firm's clients on his right. He looked at me when I sat down. His eyes moved to my dress and then away. "Madeleine," he said. "You came." "I was invited," I said. Cecily leaned across the table. "We weren't sure you'd make the effort. It is a bit of a schlep from your end of town. I live 11 minutes from the Shaw Center." I did not say this. I poured myself water and looked around the room. 3 tables away, I spotted the person I'd been expecting to see. His name was Philip Okafor, 51 years old, Crown Attorney with the Ontario Ministry of the Attorney General, based in Ottawa. We had crossed paths professionally 4 years ago, on an unrelated matter, and we had maintained a careful, cordial professional relationship since then. I had reached out to him 6 weeks ago, not through official channels, through a mutual contact, a woman we both knew from a federal anti-corruption working group, and I had shared with him, in a very preliminary and informal way, the broad strokes of what I had found. He had asked for the documentation. I had provided it. I had not told my family. Philip caught my eye from across the room and gave a single slight nod. I picked up my water glass. The award portion of the evening was everything it should have been. My mother walked to the podium, and she was graceful and brief and genuinely moved. And she spoke about the importance of mental health care in a way that made several people at our table tear up. And Fletcher led the applause with the kind of enthusiastic public performance he was very good at. I clapped for my mother. I watched her face. I thought about the conversation we were going to have in a few weeks, once everything was done, and I thought about how to make that conversation as gentle as possible. Dinner came. The salmon, as always at these events, was overcooked, at some point between the main course and the dessert course. Fletcher made a comment to one of his clients about the trust. Nothing specific, just an offhand reference about managing family assets, the kind of casual claim of ownership that had become so habitual, he didn't even notice he was doing it anymore. His client nodded. Cecily smiled. I looked at the bread basket. Then I reached into my bag and took out the envelope. "Fletcher," I said, "there's something I need you to have." He looked at the envelope. He looked at me. The smirk started. "Maddie, this isn't really the time for." "It's a preliminary notice," I said. "From the Office of the Public Sector Integrity Commissioner, in coordination with the Ontario Ministry of the Attorney General. It concerns the Arnaud Family Trust, specifically the 2018 and 2021 amendments to the original trust deed." The table went quiet. Fletcher took the envelope. He opened it, he read the first page, and then I watched his face do that thing. All 5 expressions. In about 3 seconds. Cecily said, "What is this?" Fletcher didn't answer her. He was still reading. "Fletcher," she said, sharper. "It's a notice of investigation," I said. I kept my voice even. I'd practiced this, not the words exactly, but the tone, the stillness. The filing irregularities were identified through standard financial review processes. The document forensics report is attached as Appendix C.I.O. This is. Fletcher put the papers down. He looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face before. Not the smirk, not the dismissiveness, something rawer. Where did you get this? I'm a forensic financial analyst, Fletcher. I've been one for 11 years. I work for the federal government. Specifically, I work in the area of financial fraud investigation. Cecily made a sound. One of Fletcher's clients excused himself to go to the bar. The other one studied his dessert plate. You don't. You work for the CRA. You're an auditor. I don't work for the CRA, I said. You assumed I worked for the CRA and I didn't correct you. That's different. Fletcher's jaw was doing something complicated. You reported your own family. I reported an irregularity that I discovered in the course of reviewing documents that directly affect me. I paused. And Pippa. She'll be getting a copy of this as well. Pippa doesn't even. She's in Vancouver, she doesn't. She's a beneficiary of the same trust. She has the same standing I do. Cecily put her hand on Fletcher's arm. Her face had gone the color of the tablecloth. We need to call James, she said. James was their personal lawyer. A friend. Also, I knew from a registry search a man who had witnessed the Second Amendment. Fletcher looked at me across the table. The room around us was continuing its gala, dessert forks clinking, a string quartet in the corner starting up again, 800 people in formal wear raising money for mental health care. My mother was 3 tables away, accepting congratulations from a woman in a blue dress. You've been planning this, Fletcher said. It wasn't quite an accusation. It was something closer to realization. I've been thorough, I said. How long? Long enough. He sat back in his chair. He was silent for almost a full minute. I didn't fill it. What do you want? He finally said. The smirk was completely gone. What was underneath it was older and tireder, and, I thought, slightly afraid. I want what the original trust deed says I'm entitled to, I said. Same as Pippa. Nothing more. And if the investigation will proceed regardless of whether we reach a civil resolution, I said. That's not my decision to make anymore. That part is above both of us now. Across the room, I could see Philip Okafor standing with 2 colleagues near the entrance. I hadn't asked him to be here. He'd mentioned, 3 weeks ago, that his wife sat on the foundation board, and they attended every year. Coincidence, or something close enough to it that the distinction didn't matter. He wasn't watching our table. He was talking to his wife, a woman in a burgundy dress, laughing at something she'd said. He looked relaxed. He looked like a man at a gala. He had also, 6 weeks ago, told me that the material I'd provided was sufficient to open a formal inquiry. That inquiry had opened quietly 10 days ago. Fletcher didn't know that yet. The notice in front of him was a preliminary notice. It would be followed by more. I had been advised about the timing. I had planned around it. The rest of the evening passed. Fletcher and Cecily left before dessert was finished. One of his clients shook my hand on the way out, which surprised me and then didn't surprise me. I stayed. I had tea. I watched my mother accept more congratulations, and I thought about the phone call I would have with her that weekend. And I felt the peculiar weight of love that has a difficult truth inside it. She would be hurt. Not about the trust, exactly. She'd been quietly furious about the trust amendments for years. I knew, in the way she said nothing about them that told me everything, she would be hurt about the length of time I'd carried this alone. I should have told her sooner. That part I regret. But I hadn't wanted her to be in the middle of it. I hadn't wanted her to have to choose, or to feel like she was choosing. She had spent 40 years making peace with a household that didn't always deserve it. I wanted to give her a clean outcome. The formal findings came 5 months later. The First Amendment to the trust deed had been fraudulently backdated. The forensic document analysis was corroborated by evidence obtained through the formal investigation, including communications between Fletcher and Kathleen Voss that established the arrangement clearly enough that her lawyer advised a plea agreement before the matter reached trial. Fletcher's license to practice law was suspended pending a Law Society of Ontario disciplinary proceeding. That proceeding concluded 7 months after that with a recommendation of disbarment. He did not contest it. The trust assets were restored to their original distribution. Equal thirds. The cottage on Lac des Chênes was sold, because none of us could imagine being there together without my father. Roland Arnault, who had been told everything by then, and who had sat in his armchair in the Rockcliffe house for a long time without saying anything, and then had looked at me and said, "You've been doing this kind of work for 11 years? And I'd said yes. And he'd said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And I'd said, "You didn't ask." He hadn't had an answer for that. I hadn't needed him to. The Spark Street property was put into management structure that distributed income quarterly. Pippa flew in from Vancouver for the signing. We went to a Vietnamese restaurant on Somerset Street afterward, just the two of us, and we split a bottle of wine and she said, "I always knew you were the scary one," and I laughed for the first time in what felt like months. 3 weeks after the civil resolution, I was invited to a professional development luncheon at the Department of Finance, the kind of quarterly thing that sounds boring and usually is. I went because I try to go to these things. Networking, visibility, the ordinary maintenance of a career. I was at the buffet table when I felt someone stop beside me. Fletcher. I hadn't known he would be there. I don't think he'd known I would be there either. He'd moved into some kind of consulting work, I'd heard, something that didn't require a law license. He looked different, smaller somehow, without the context of the firm and the clients, and the sense of inherited authority around him like a second suit. We stood there for a moment. "Madeleine," he said. "Fletcher," I said. Neither of us said anything else for a moment. The buffet line moved forward slightly. "How's Mum?" he asked finally. "Better," I said. "She started a new volunteer program at the Civic. She seems good." He nodded. He looked like he wanted to say something and couldn't find it. I picked up a plate. "Fletcher," I said, "I didn't do it to hurt you." He was quiet for a long moment. "I know," he said. "That's the part I'm still working through." He moved away down the buffet line. I watched him for a second, and then I turned back to the food, and I made myself a plate, and I went and sat down, and I had lunch. That's what the end of something looks like, mostly. Not a bang. Not a verdict read out in a formal room, though there was that too. Not the moment across the gala table when the envelope landed and his face did those 5 things. It's a buffet line. It's your brother, smaller than he used to be. It's you, still standing. It's the ordinary lunch that comes after. I drove back to my office on Wellington Street, and I sat at my desk, and I pulled up the next file, and I started reading.